Exactly. And the same is true. It's not just in business, also in communication. In communication, there are things that change and things that don't change. The things that change are tools and technology. For example, 50 years ago, we didn't have PowerPoint. Maybe 5 years ago, 10 years ago, we didn't have Zoom, or we are using Riverside. A few years ago, we didn't have Riverside. Just again, 2 or 3 years ago, we didn't have ChatGPT. Now, all of these tools will change.
Now, you've been quoted saying that your mission is to stop great ideas from failing because the way they've been presented. How many brilliant ideas have you seen die because nobody could understand them?
There are so many great ideas, Steve, that exactly what you said fail just because of the way they are presented. Now, for example, Warren Buffett many years ago gave a lecture. I think it was Columbia University or another university in the US. And he said to the students, right now, I would be willing to invest $100,000 on each of you for 10% of your future earnings. And then he said, well, actually, you can increase your value by 50%. So I'm going to invest $150,000 on each of you for 10% of your future earnings if you do one thing. And that thing is, you have to learn public speaking. Now, he wanted to make a point. And the point is that if you want to succeed in life and work, whatever success means for you, then what really makes a difference is your ability to pitch, present, and communicate your ideas. You can have the greatest idea in the world, but if you can't communicate it, it doesn't matter.
That makes so much sense. I've heard many times it's said that the most valuable real estate is that real estate on stage. Can you comment a little bit about that?
It's very much connected to what we said. Like I'll give you a couple of other examples. If you think about brands and products you like, now I remember Steve a few weeks ago when we had a chat, we talked about a little bit about the diary of a CEO, the podcast, and one of the sponsors there is Huel. I don't know if you know the company Huel. They do like food complements, these kind of things, and I'm a client and I like the company. But the reason why I like the company is not just because of their product. Yes, I like the product. So the product, the project, the idea, whatever your context is, of course, that's the basic line, and it has to be solid. But then I also trust them and I like them because of how they show up, because of how they communicate. And it could be on stage. You mentioned on stage, Steve. For me, on stage doesn't have to be on stage at a conference. If at the moment we're having a chat online, we are on stage. Even a one-to-one meeting when you need to share your ideas, you communicate it. For me, that's public speaking. You are on stage. I'll give you another quick example. Another company I like is Allbirds. They make shoes. They say that they make the world's most comfortable shoes. Now, I have lots of pairs of their brand. I don't know if they seem comfortable to me. I don't know if they are the most comfortable shoes in the world, but what drove me to them again is not just the shoes, it's the way they show up, the way they communicate, the values, the brands, and all of that to me is how you show up on stage.
I like the idea that you talk around that almost really everything is a stage. When you're sitting in front of your kids and asking them to, clean their room, you're really on a stage in your living room and you're trying to gather the audience attention. And then you're trying to get the audience emotionally connected to the idea that cleaning a room is a good idea. And then you're trying to get them to action, to actually doing the things and then celebrating as the audience claps as the job gets done. And that's a stage. So how do you get somebody from saying that I can recognize that there's so many points in my life that I'm on stage to not having from that saying that that's important from the moment that they have fear of getting on stage?
Principles. The most important thing to make that transition happen is for people to realize that rather than obsessing over tools and technology, and we can talk about these things because they can be useful for you to become a more confident, a more effective communicator, presenter, public speaker. But what really makes a difference are the principles. And when I say principles, I'm referring to things like, okay, do you have a message which is simple for the audience to understand? Is it clear? Is your story clear for them to follow? Is it relevant to them and their needs and the context? Do you have a message which is engaging for the audience? And this is what really makes a difference. Without principles that are at the foundation of your communication, then you are not going to make the transition. And it doesn't matter what tools or technology you use, it's not going to make a difference.
Yeah, Grant Cardone's been quoted saying that principles are senior to mechanics, and I firmly agree with that. And presentations, operations, sales, leadership, any of these things, operating at the principal level is so crucial. I think it gets interpreted through the mechanics, and that's when mechanics start to become important. Simon Sinek, wrote a book called Start with Why. And I think that is fundamental to really, that element that you've got to start at that level, up in the clouds, so to speak. It does have to be interpreted. And I think some of our dialogue is going to go through that, because look, guys, when you're looking at doing a presentation and you're sitting there going, I want to put together my 58 slide deck and I want to go through all these complicated terms and that sort of thing. What we're going to talk about today is really going to help you figure out what the right strategy is so that you're going to connect with your audience. Not in the way that maybe you thought of, because the ways are shifting. The internet has changed. AI has come around. Presentations aren't just in front of a big crowd on a stage. They're digital, like how we're doing right now. And so you need to be able to adapt to that. So this conversation is really important for people who want to present with clarity, not confusion. Now, I know your New York NYU has adopted your book and you've coached TEDx speakers and entrepreneurs. I want to go before that point and kind of get you into the moment when you were early on in your presentation life. And what was the most painful presentation moment? What was the most painful presentation failure?
I had a number of failures, and it wasn't so much a specific presentation, but those failures are very much connected to my ability or inability at the time to get my message across. Now, for example, before doing what I do now, I launched a blog, and I did it for a few years. Every week I would publish an article, and we're talking about long form articles before AI. So you really had to write those articles word by word, word for word. And it took a lot of time and effort and passion. And my objective was to get to thousands of readers, because then once you have an audience, then you can start thinking about how you can monetize it. And after a few years, I just had a couple of readers, and one of them was my wife. So it wasn't really making an impact. Also, after that, I said, okay, maybe instead of creating content, why don't I curate content? So I launched a newsletter, and the idea was that, again, every week I would collect the most interesting resources and articles and links on certain topics, and then I would make them available for my audience. And again, the objective was to get to thousands of subscribers because of the same reasons. After, I think it was 2 or 3 years, Steve, we got to, I still remember the number, 19 subscribers. That's it. And again, half of them were just friends being polite. And I'll give you one final example quickly. I'm a big fan of purpose-driven entrepreneurship, using business as a force for good. We have a charity partner, we have our own social impact project, and once we put together an event in collaboration with a charity partner to try and motivate people to donate something for a partner. And it didn't make a massive impact. And in all of those cases, going back to your very first question, Steve, in all of those cases, it wasn't the idea that was bad. It was just didn't make a massive impact, not because of the idea, but just because of how the idea was communicated. And in that case, how it was communicated by me. And that's what then pushed me to start my own journey to improve my own communication and presentation skills.
Yeah, it's there's nothing more painful than when you have that YouTube channel or you've got that Instagram and you're putting out all of this content every day, twice a day, 3 times a day, and nobody's watching it. And you keep on doing it, you keep on hitting that grindstone, and it's just not connecting. So when you're at that moment and you could have quit at that moment and just stopped, what kept you going and what did you do differently?
What kept me going was the passion for the subject. Also, the realization that there was a problem. and there's still a problem. If we think about our space, presenting, public speaking, communication. Now, the reality is, whether we like it or not, most presentations suck, especially business presentations. Isn't that true, Steve? Most business presentations suck. So there is a problem, and there's a way forward, there's a way to solve the problem. We know how to solve the problem. So that conviction was the main driving force behind everything else that happened.
And so then you realized that that problem needed to be solved. So then what was the first step in solving it?
What was the first step in solving it? Well, okay, for me, Steve, at the beginning, it was just about helping friends. So I just started like this, helping friends, even for free. You have a skill. You can solve a problem. You can help others achieve what they want to go. You can help them go from wherever they are today with their presentation skills to a different level. And again, that's different for each person. And then in a very simple way, you just start helping out friends, and then word of mouth, and then one friend becomes someone else who's willing to do it, not just for free, but in a professional way, and just gradually, and it's been 15 years now.
And so the person that you were that was helping that person for free to the person that you are today, helping people all around the world, you've obviously have grown and transcended to a different level. When you look back to that person at the beginning, what advice would you give to them now?
From
Talking to your early self of you.
a business perspective, or from a presentation public speaking perspective, Steve?
I'd say from a business perspective first, and then we'll go into the public.
From a business perspective, two things. One is start earlier. I could have started earlier, because when I described those projects that failed, I was running those projects while I was working for someone else. And I was working in a sales role in a multinational company. And the reality is that often in those, when you are in those environments, big corporates, then, for example, in my case, I spent 7 years in a sales role, in a business development role, in reality, without making any sales, because you are not the person who has to have the skill to to have a conversation with someone and take them from, oh, we don't know each other, to, yes, let's work together. There's a skill, and this is connected to the second thing. The first thing is start earlier. Rather than working for someone else for 7 years, I could have started earlier. And the other thing is very much connected to what I said: learn how to sell. Because in business, you need to make something and you need to sell something. You need to sell what you make. These are the two key things that you need to be able to do, either yourself or with a team. And whether we like it or not, then if we are not able to sell our ideas, our products, our services, again, it doesn't matter what we make. So learning the craft of handling a successful sales conversation, a successful discovery call, where you are able to, again, start a conversation with someone. That person may or may not know you. If they do know you, maybe they know you online. That's it. And then by the end of the conversation, they say, "Okay, yes, that's my credit card. Let's work together." That's a skill.
Yeah, my fundamental belief is that on the other side of a transaction that is a win-win is exactly what you are looking for as the person providing the service or the products, and the client buying the services or the products. The challenge is it has to be on the other side of that transaction. And the transactions mean they're going from a change of doing whatever they're doing to the state, where they're in a status state, to a new state. And that change is difficult for a lot of people. So to help somebody make decisions is definitely a difficult thing. And when you're on a stage, not on a one-to-one perspective, you're trying to actually influence the change of state from one state to another, from a state of indecision, inaction, to a state of action and state of decision. And what, one of the things that I think you've been quoted is to say less to your audience, because if you say less to your audience will remember more. And why is that?
That's one of the core principles. You want to be able to simplify your message. Yes, say less so they can remember more. Now, for example, Steve, if you think about writing, books, articles, blogs, emails, all experienced writers know that the key to great writing is not in what they say, it's in what they don't say. The more they remove, the better the book, the better the article, the better the email. And the same is true with your presentations. A very common mistake I see is that often we know so much about a subject and we are also so close to it that we think that everything is important. So we think that we need to communicate everything. Isn't that true? But what we need to do is we need to always put ourselves in the audience's shoes. If everything is important, then nothing is important. If everything is important, then nothing is. Now, I know, Steve, you like quotes. I'll give you a quote. Marc Breton, he used to work as an executive vice president at, a multinational company, great presenter. He always liked to say, I only remember one thing from a pitch or presentation. Just tell me what I need to know. No more. One thing. So this is my invitation for our listeners. What's your one thing? Think about your next presentation. If you were to summarize your next talk or presentation in one message, what would you say? That's the big idea behind your talk.
I love that. Jay Papasan wrote a book called The One Thing, which is
Yeah,
just an absolutely brilliant book.
I read it.
Yeah, just magnificent. And make the one thing the one thing. So why then do you think smart people who should know this struggle so much with the idea of saying less is to create more? And why do they struggle so much with clarity?
They do because of one challenge in particular, which is the number one problem in communication, and that's the curse of knowledge. And it's something that the Heath brothers in their fantastic book Made to Stick talked about years ago. And in that book, they give a great example. 1990, a psychology student asked two groups of people to play a game, tappers and listeners. If you were a tapper, you had to tap out rhythms to famous songs on a table. So, Steve, think about very famous songs, but instead of singing the songs, you just had to tap out the rhythm. That's it. If you were a listener, you just had to try and guess the songs. That's it. Before the experiment started, the student asked the tappers to estimate how many songs they thought that the listeners would have guessed. And they thought 50%. That was their estimation. Now, in reality, things were very different because the listeners only guessed 2.5% of the songs. 2.5 versus 50, massive difference. Why? Because if you are a tapper, you have knowledge that the listeners don't have. You have the songs in your head. So for you, those songs are obvious. But if you're a listener, you don't have the knowledge. You don't have the songs in your head. So you do find it very hard to guess them. And this is the number one problem in communication, which happens especially if you have a lot of knowledge, a lot of experience. The number one problem is the curse of knowledge, which means that we find it hard to imagine what it means not knowing what we know. It's our inability to put ourselves in the audience's shoes. And that's why most people fall into that trap.
I love the idea of the tapper versus the listener. And I was just, as you were doing it, I was tapping to Easy Come, Easy Go, Will You Let You? And
Great
what I
song, by the way.
realized, yeah, what I realized is I wasn't actually listening to the tapping. I was listening to the song. So if we're going to communicate with the audience, we've got to stop listening to the song in our head and start listening to the tapping. And the tapping is because that's the only thing that they see. And that's the only thing that we should be paying attention to.
And to do that, the first step to get to that level of expertise in communication is to understand that it's always their presentation, not yours. The very first step is not to open up PowerPoint. It's not even to think about what you want to communicate. We need to start with them. When you give a presentation, it's their presentation, not yours. Now, think of a presentation as a present. If I want to give you a present, it's your present, not mine. So I need to make sure that I know you so that I can buy something that you like. Presentation is the same thing. Now, for example, there's a story from an executive, an expert in leadership, Marie from Paris. Marie, again, is an expert in leadership, and she was invited by an association in Finland to give a talk about leadership. And she was super excited. It was one of her first international speaking opportunities. So she prepared really well. She knew her message. She told us, Steve, that she had prepared 55 beautiful slides. And also she practiced. So she was ready to go. She flew to Finland the day before the conference, then arrived there on the day half an hour before the audience because she wanted to make sure that she had time to set things up. And when she was about to connect her laptop to the screen, she realized that there was no screen. So a little bit of panic, she went and asked the organizers, assuming that they would say, sorry, Marie, now we're going to fix this for you. What they did instead was they started laughing. They started laughing. So she says, why are you laughing? And they say, look, Marie, you want to show 50 slides, but actually you've been invited to give a talk to the association in Finland of blind people. Blind people. Now, I know, Steve, it's an extreme example. It sounds like a bad joke, but it happened for real. You see, Marie was very well prepared, apart from one thing. She didn't know her audience. And that's always the foundation for effective presenting, public speaking, communication is to start with the audience.
And that's so important. And I think you're absolutely right. Too many people fret about their slides. I know myself, I've been guilty as charged for that 50 slide presentation, and I've gone through it. I've been guilty as charged for, too much information. And yeah, look, you said clarity is not dumbing it down. It's about elevating your message to be heard. I think that's really important. Now, when we look at it, it's really challenging because we get so enticed by this new technologies. I mean, AI tools, there's all these different ways you can do it inside Canva where you click a button and everything gets built out. Is clarity becoming a casualty of convenience right now?
Mentioned AI tools. Now, and this is very much connected to the principle of clarity in communication. Now, I don't know what you think about this, Steve. I think that AI is not going to change public speaking forever. Now, don't get me wrong. I do think that AI is super powerful, and I do use it. For example, I use AI every single day. I use it personally. I use it for my business. I use it for my own communication in a business as well. And however, now, for example, if you think about Jeff Bezos, Amazon, he often says, everyone always asks me, what do you think is going to change in the next 10 years? And he says, no one has ever asked me, what do you think is not going to change in the next 10 years? And he thinks that the second question is much more useful because if you, as he puts, if you focus on the things that don't change, you will be successful. In the case of Amazon, for example, they know that 10 years from now, people will still want cheap prices, fast delivery, and a massive selection. If they keep focusing on those things, they will be successful.
That right there, and I want to hammer on that. That right there is probably one of the most powerful things I've heard in a very long time, that most people focus on the things that are changing, not the things that are not changing. And the power in business is to focus on the things that are not changing, because frankly, that's what creates a sustainable business. And then you can amplify those things that are not changing with the things that are changing. That's your kerosene on your already burning fire.
Exactly. And the same is true. It's not just in business, also in communication. In communication, there are things that change and things that don't change. The things that change are tools and technology. For example, 50 years ago, we didn't have PowerPoint. Maybe 5 years ago, 10 years ago, we didn't have Zoom, or we are using Riverside. A few years ago, we didn't have Riverside. Just again, 2 or 3 years ago, we didn't have ChatGPT. Now, all of these tools will change. That's inevitable. But what will never change are the fundamental principles of communication. Aristotle was the first one, more than 2,000 years ago, who gave us the building blocks of effective communication. And today's best communicators still follow those principles. Now, for example, in your case, Steve, let's say, I know that you give talks, you speak in public. Let's say that 10 years from now, you give a talk, and then at a conference after the talk, someone from the audience comes to you and they say, Steve, great talk. I just wish that your message was not so simple for me to understand. That will never happen. Or I just wish that your storyline was not so clear for me to follow. Or Steve, great talk. I just wish that your message was not so relevant to me and my needs. That will never happen. And it will never happen because these are the fundamental principles of communication. Now, again, don't get me wrong. I'm not saying we should not. It's exactly what you said. We should use the tools. I think if we don't use AI today, we are being stupid. We need to use AI, but we need to do it to amplify the things that are not changing. So it has to be AI or technology in general, plus you, plus the human side of things. And if we have that combination, that's a very powerful combination.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I think the CEO of NVIDIA was well stated when he said, AI is not going to take your job. A person enabled by AI will. And I'm going to even take one step further is they already are. Look at this conversation that we had today. We've got two people having a dialogue, but I can tell you a lot of the work that I did for my back end research to ensure that my knowledge around your book and my knowledge around the content that we're going to talk about, all of that came through an AI enabled process. Because to go and do that kind of level of deep research in the period of time in which I wanted to do it, it would not have been possible without AI. And I'm a huge proponent of AI, but I really do believe as an enabler, as a force to take over tasks that are mundane, as something that can really elevate you as really a co-pilot. I think Dan Martell, who wrote the book Buy Back Your Time, I mean, he said if you're not using AI at least 5 to 15 times a day, you are going to be left behind. And I think that's a fact.
I agree 100%. And I was thinking, as you were saying this, I was thinking, am I using AI 15 to 20 times a day? Maybe I am, maybe I'm not. So I need to think about that.
Yeah, for sure. But I mean, it's like anything. It's you have to start somewhere and you have to start training. And just like, I mean, I think you said there's no such thing as a natural presenter, only people who've practiced by being human on stage. I think that's everything in life. I had a guy this morning at jujitsu. I mean, he's a young, strong guy. He dominates in Muay Thai. I mean, he does really super well. But when it comes to jujitsu, this old 50-year-old guy is crushing that 23-year-old beast of a human. And it's because I've trained over and over again. And I think most people think that presenting is natural. It's a natural state. It's actually an unnatural state. And I want to try to dig into how do you take somebody who's terrified, who hides behind their slides, hides behind jargon, and gets them to step forward and become their authentic self as a presenter.
The key is familiarity and preparation. Many people think that if you want to become a more confident, a more impactful presenter, that kind of confidence comes from natural talent, innate self-belief, wishful thinking. It has nothing to do with that. Confidence comes from a few things. The first one being familiarity. For example, some time ago, I watched an interview with Kobe Bryant, NBA superstar, and one of the questions was, Kobe, how is it possible that every time I see you playing, you always look so confident? And he said, the only reason why you think I'm confident is because when you see me doing certain things, I've done those things 1,000 times before. It's exactly the same with jiu-jitsu, with your training, Steve. I've done those things 1,000 times before. Confidence comes from familiarity and preparation. And then preparation means not just opening PowerPoint, means, okay, there's a structured way of thinking about presenting. From the very beginning, which is knowing how to analyze the audience, to knowing how to brainstorm to identify your key messages. You also need to be able to craft a clear and engaging storyline from the very beginning, where you want to grab the audience's attention to the very end. Then you've got the illustration side of things. If you want to use a presentation tool and you want to avoid the typical death by PowerPoint. And then at the end, you also need to be able to make a strong connection with the audience. And you do that also with your delivery skills. It's not just what you say, which to me is the most important thing, but it's also how you say it. So there's a structured way of thinking about presenting, and that's how you go from wherever you are today with your public speaking skills to a whole new level.
That makes so much sense. And I do when I have conversations with athletes in jiu-jitsu, that's one of the things that I think is most critical is understanding that repetition will come out when you're into that moment. It's never about that most fancy, elegant, crazy thing that you can do. It's about really the fundamentals. Because John Danaher was quoted saying the reason why jiu-jitsu is so powerful in any aspect of somebody's life is because it teaches you how to make decisions under stress. And when you can make decisions under stress without learning anything new, you actually amplify your outcomes. Because when you're under a high degree of stress, you're operating at typically your lowest level of performance. So you can have the same amount of knowledge, and just by reducing your stress level, you're going to access more knowledge that's already within inside you. And that comes through repetition. I mean, this right here is probably my 150th something podcast that I've recorded. I spoke on 42 stages last year. I've done presentations thousands of times, and that makes it so that I'm confident when I'm having a conversation that and what I'm saying is going to be communicated well. Can I get better? Of course I can. Just like a black belt in jiu-jitsu always says, well, this is the first belt because now I've realized all the things I don't know. As a presenter, you're going to go through the same process.
Love the black belt analogy. Yeah, repetition is key. Now, I'll give you my own example. Since 2018, one of the main things we do for us from a business perspective to marketing and to generate leads is a weekly presentation. It's a presentation for prospects. And I've been delivering that presentation every single week, no exception, since 2018. And it's exactly the same presentation. Now, of course, over the years, you change it, you tweak it, you try to improve it because there's always room for improvement. But it's that kind of repetition. Week 1, week 2, week 3, week 52, year 1. And then you start again in January. And that makes a massive difference.
Yeah, that totally makes a massive difference. Now, the world's changed since 2018, and we're looking at now, obviously we went through all those lockdowns and that sort of thing, and a lot of people migrated to this virtual or even hybrid style of presentations. And that's challenged a lot of people to think differently about how they can connect with audiences in different ways, but still make it meaningful. What are the do's and the don't do's, the goes and the don't goes when it comes to presenting virtually online, like to a large Zoom session, or to something where you've got a hybrid, where you've got a room full of people and a Zoom session? What are the do's and don'ts around that kind of a presentation?
We need to distinguish the two because they are similar, but there are some differences. One scenario is 100% online, and the second scenario you described is a bit of a hybrid situation. When it comes to 100% online, the most important thing to consider is the level of interaction with the audience, which has to be even higher than what you do in person. Now, if you think about the audience's attention, it's a bit like the sand in an hourglass. If you think about the sand in an hourglass, it runs out after a few minutes, but it's very easy to just flip it over and start again. With the audience's attention, it's the same thing. Their attention will run out after a few minutes, but it's relatively easy to just flip it over and start again, which means that it should not be up to the audience to work hard to pay attention. It should be up to you as the speaker to work hard to keep their attention high. And the best way to do that is to include moments of interaction. Now, if you are in person, research says that the audience's attention tends to drop every 10 minutes, more or less. So you're giving an in-person presentation, more or less every 10 minutes, you need to find a way to interact with the audience. Online, is it easier or harder to keep the audience's attention high? It's harder. So the 10-minute rule becomes the 3 to 5 minute rule. You are giving a webinar, for example, you're presenting online. Ideally, every 3 to 5 minutes, you should interact with the audience. So that's the main thing to consider when it comes to Online. Would you like me to share a few things when it comes to the hybrid experience?
Mm.
Yeah.
Yeah, when it comes to hybrid, we've looked at the audience attention is 10 minutes, and that seems about right to what I would have put in my head. 3 minutes, I mean, that's shocking, but I think it's definitely something that I can identify with. So absolutely, when you come to the hybrid, and then maybe in each of those, give some ideas of what that interaction could look like.
Yeah, ideas for interaction. It could be as simple as, again, when it comes to interactions, people start thinking about using technology. Keep it simple. It could be as simple as a question that you ask, which is connected to either what you've just said in the presentation or to something that you're planning to say next. So, for example, if in a webinar, my own webinar, if I talk about the power of simplicity, then I can say, okay, just out of curiosity, on a scale from 0 to 10, show me with your fingers. 0 means that you find it very hard to simplify your message. Self-assessment. 10 means that you find it very easy, or anything in between. Let me know. It could be as simple as that. Every time the audience does something, even if it's typing something in the chat, saying something out loud, raising the head, it means that they are there with you, they're listening to you, they're not doing something else. Now, when it comes to hybrid, the biggest challenge there is that those joining remotely often feel disconnected from the room. It's a bit like watching a concert on TV instead of being there live. The experience is completely different. Your goal as a presenter is to do everything you can to make the remote participants feel just as involved as those in the room. How do you do that? You want to have an inclusive mindset. And the mindset you should have is, if even just one person is online, you need to treat the experience like everyone is online. And that means that you need to design that talk, that workshop, that experience so that both people in the room and the online attendees can participate in the same way. Now, a few practical tips. You could begin your session by engaging remote participants first. What most people would do is they would engage the in-person participants. Start with the online participants. You could have two facilitators. Again, it depends on your context. If it's more of a workshop, you could have one facilitator in the room and another one online. You could use, again, going back to technology, collaborative tools like Miro, for example. Steve, you were talking about the power of repetition. You should repeat questions. If someone in the room asks a question, make sure that you repeat it so that everyone can hear it, especially those online. You need to pause. From time to time, you want to pause and check in, but not just with the people in the room, also with those online. You can and you should avoid side conversations from people in the room. So you see simple and practical things that we can do to make sure that the experience is equally effective. The bottom line is this, and that's the mindset shift. If one person is online, everyone is online. That's how we should treat the experience.
That makes so much sense. I've seen it done quite well where they give almost like this unique, they call it like a back of the room or back door experience where you get this like VIP experience by being online, which you get, certain type of interaction with the host, you get a certain type of interaction with some of the guests to kind of make it a little bit different than those people who come in the room. And then the people come in the room get access to certain events, parties, courses, whatever else they might get. So thematically, they have different outcomes of access, but they have these moments of congruency where you're bringing everybody together.
And you see, what you've described is a process where the speaker or the people involved have designed the experience intentionally. And the key is you want to think about it in advance, you want to plan in advance, and everything you do, from the things you say to the things you show to your call to action, whatever your context is, it has to be intentional and it has to be organic and connected to the different contexts, because attending in person and attending online, it's not the same thing, and we should be mindful of that.
That makes so much sense. Now, I know when we talk about a little bit more about, I won't even call this mechanics. I think it is a little bit of mechanics, but it definitely is just chatting at the principal level, is that you say the best talks follow what, so what's next. And that to me makes me think of something like, say George R. R. Martin or Tolkien or whatever, where they have this threaded story where, the end of the chapter comes up, it's, 11:30 at night, you're about to fall asleep, but man, I just got to go to that next one. I mean, Netflix is notorious for this. I don't know if have you ever got the Netflix shaming message where it comes in and says, "Are you still watching?" Shaming message. And you've got to click, "Yes, I'm still watching," because you've just juiced through 7 or 8 episodes because those hooks that just is like, okay, so what's next? And what's next? Is that the message that you're kind of talking about?
By the way, I was thinking about Netflix. It did happen to me in the past. I had to stop my Netflix subscription recently because I became a dad and I've got many other things to do now than watching Netflix. But when I talk about what next, here is the approach I'm coming from. What next is a great way to simplify your message, to get to the core of the main idea behind your presentation, behind your talk. And here is how it works. What means, okay, what's the one thing? We were talking about the one thing. What's the one thing you want them to remember, to understand, to take away from your presentation? And that's important, but it's not enough. That's, by the way, a very common mistake I see. Often, as speakers, whether we are aware of it or not, we stay at the what level. The audience doesn't know something, we tell them something, we share some information. That's okay, but it's not enough. We need to go down. What? So what? Why should they care? Why is your message important and relevant to them, to your audience, not to you? And this is the key to great presenting. The key to great presenting is to always talk to your audience about them, even if you're talking about you. And later, if you want, I can give you an example of that. But we want to make it about them. And then what next? Okay, now that they care, now that they understand why this is relevant to them, what do you want them to do after your presentation? Or at the very least, what do you want them to think, believe, feel as a result of your presentation? And you see, Steve, that's one way for you to simplify your message, and it's not an academic exercise. Once you go through this framework, you can use it in the presentation. It could become the structure of your presentation, or it could be just the final message that you get across. It works really well as a conclusion. You approach the conclusion and you say something like, okay, if there's one thing I would like you to take away from this session, it's this. And then you go with your what, so what next. It works really well as a conclusion.
Nancy Duarte said the audience doesn't need more information, they need meaning. And when I pair that to the Netflix, experience of when you just crush out 18 episodes, it's because of the what's next. It's like, okay, I want to get what's next. I want to get what's next. But really, if I look at the what, so what's next, probably the most important in my mind would be the so what, because it's like, why do I care? And that goes down to the meaning, not the material.
I agree. Among the three, the so what is the key. Remember, the key to effective presenting is to always make it about them. You always want to talk to them, about them, even if you're talking about you. For example, if I tell you, Steve, at Ideas on Stage, we have it's not true, but just to give an example, 150 offices all over the world. I'm talking at you about me, and nobody cares how many offices you have or I have. If I tell you, at Ideas on Stage, we have 150 offices all over the world so that you can get access to a customer support team wherever you are. Now I'm talking to you about you, even if I'm talking about me. And that's the key to great presenting.
So the what is about me. The so what is about the person who's the audience or the buyer or whoever else, because it's about them. The what is almost irrelevant. It's the so what that's matter.
I would say that the what is not even about you. This what is about the idea, whatever the idea is that you want to share. It's not, you always have to put a spotlight, not on yourself. You want to put a spotlight on the idea. It's not about look at me, look at me, look at me. It's look at that. That's the idea. And then in the so what, you don't take it for granted that just because you understand why that idea is so important, because again, you are an expert, you've been working on that project for 15 years, you get it. but we should never take it for granted that just because you get it, that the audience will get it too. You need to put yourself in their shoes, and you need to make it very clear why their idea, their product, their service, their project is important, is useful for them.
Yeah, that makes sense. That makes total sense. Now, a little bit of tactical stuff. Let's get into some tactics here. Spontaneity. You said planned spontaneity is what makes moments stick. How can you rehearse being spontaneous?
The more you rehearse, the more spontaneous you will appear. It's counterintuitive, but that's how it works. Many people think that they should not rehearse, they don't want to rehearse because of course, you want to appear natural and spontaneous, but the opposite is true. You see, rehearsing is a bit like climbing a mountain. If you want to climb a mountain and then you start going up and then you stop, you will never get to the top. So what do you need to do? You need to keep climbing so that you get to the top and then you can start going down. In preparation for any presentation, say, for example, that you rehearse and you do it once and then you stop. Of course, if you do that, you will not appear spontaneous. You will appear robotic. But when you appear robotic, it's not because you have rehearsed. It's because you haven't done it enough. You need to keep climbing, which means that you need to rehearse a few more times so that you can get to the top of the mountain. And getting to the top means internalizing your message. You don't have to memorize your presentations unless it works for you, but otherwise I wouldn't recommend it. But you do need to internalize it. You need to own your content, including those moments that will feel spontaneous, but in reality, you've planned those moments. Going back to the interactions, any presentation should be a designed conversation, which means that the audience needs to feel that they are building the presentation live together with you. But in reality, you've designed those moments, including the moments of interaction, in advance.
That makes so much sense. Now, in preparation, in doing things like using AI can mimic words and create stories and all that jazz, but it can't feel tension. It can't create pauses. What part of storytelling do you think only humans can really own?
The part of storytelling which is very human is our ability to make the story the audience's story. Because storytelling is great, but storytelling is not just about telling a story. How do you tell the story? And there's another very common mistake I see there is that we make the story about us. And that's connected to what we said before. Even the story you tell has to be about the audience. Because you wanted to get tactical, I'll give you a tactical framework to tell a great story. And that could be, let's take the example of a client success story. You are pitching on stage, presenting on stage, or it could be even a one-to-one conversation, and you want to share the story of how you've helped another client solve the challenge that your audience is facing. What you want to do is 4 steps: setting, complication, turning point, resolution. Setting could be as simple as time and place. For example, 3 years ago, we worked with ABC in Toronto. Time and place, that's it, that's the setting. Then complication, and the key here is to explain the problem, the challenge that client of yours had before they met you. But this is the complication. It's not about you. It's from the perspective of the client. Then the turning point is the only place in the story where just a little bit you want to talk about how you've helped your client solve their problem. But then when you get to the resolution, which is the final step, remember, setting, complication, turning point, resolution. Again, in the resolution, you want to put a spotlight on the success of your client. It's not about you. Again, it's not me. Here you want to explain how the success, the outcome that they have achieved. Now, of course, if you do that, you are getting the same message across, which is that you can help your audience, you can help those people listening to you, but you are getting the message across in a much more elegant way. And that's a very human skill. In, what is it now, 25? Who knows what's going to happen in the next few years? It could be even in the next few days with AI. Who knows now?
Yeah, that's very true. And now, to close off, if somebody's listening to this and they're thinking it's a really good message, but it has nothing to do with me because I have nothing worth saying, what's the message you would give to them?
Everyone has something worth saying. Everyone has gone through experiences, life experiences, personal experiences, experiences that are connected to their professional life. So I don't buy that. Everyone has a story to tell. And when you understand, it's not about whether or not you have something to say. You do have something to say. The challenge is, how do you say it? Can you share your story? And when I say a story, it doesn't have to be your personal story. Can you share your message? Can you communicate your idea? Whatever that idea is, it could be your own thing, it could be your product, it could be a service, it could be a project, whatever that is, let's call it an idea. Once you understand, and it comes with, it's not just understanding, it's like jujitsu, it comes with repetition, with a lot of practice. Even like I'm a presentation coach, Steve, that even for me, that there's always room for improvement, even if like you have done thousands of presentations. But when you get the understanding and you practice it, and you can see the impact that you can have when you can communicate your ideas, then you can see that it's a game changer. And we go back to the very beginning. In the end, whether you like it or not, whether you are aware of it or not, you can have the greatest idea in the world, but if you can't communicate it, it doesn't matter.
Yeah, and I think that's a great thing for anybody to focus on is, and it doesn't have to be that you're trying to change the world. Maybe you're just trying to change what you're going to have for dinner tonight with your spouse, and how you communicate and how you present yourself, and how you help somebody come to the decision that you both win. That is a skill that I think everybody needs to know, because if you can learn that, there's so many things that's inside you right now that isn't being communicated with the world that can be let out, and imagine the wonderful things that can happen. Andrea Pacini, it has been an absolute pleasure having you on the show to talk really about presenting. And I think, anybody listening to this who wants to get into action, check him out, because I mean, I love his content. I loved his book, and just really dive into it, because your voice, let your voice be a force for good, and let your voice get out there and be heard.
Thank you, Steve. The pleasure was mine.
Thank you. And guys, this is the money. This is the mindset. This is the mentoring podcast. We'll see you on the next one.